I am Noah Gibbs on computer science, just the useful bits, one additional time with Larry Orton, who was kind enough to say, "Hey, I notice you've talked to a lot of people who've gone to university and various similar places and decided how that prepared them for the job, but you haven't talked to anybody who's still in school." And he's right, I haven't. And so he volunteered to talk to me today about that. Hey, Larry, good to talk to you.
Hey, thank you very much for having me on. I'm really excited.
Likewise, likewise. Um, so even while you're in school, I'll bet you've got some opinions about some of your classes. So this is going to be a little more freeform because, I have a usual list of questions, and there are questions designed for somebody who isn't in your position. And so we'll do it a little more freeform this time. I think that's a good thing. Um, is there anything that you're currently taking where you're just asking yourself, can there possibly be any real use for this? Because I'll bet there are a lot of people in that position, and if you are, I'll bet you're one of many.
Yes. So it's funny because actually I am taking a class right now that I thought by the title would be extremely useful, and it's application programming. I was
Okay.
actually pretty excited about that, and then I realized that it was just Visual Basic in a very basic form.
Okay.
So, which is fun. But I had already taught myself Visual Basic years ago, and have been using it for myself in the Army and for years. And so I was all excited about the title, really, oh, application
Yep.
programming, great, finally. And then it was Visual Basic. So,
Yep. Well, I'm kind of amused because Visual Basic for Applications is the name of that language. Like when you say, "What's that thing Excel runs?" It turns out Visual Basic for Applications is the name of it. And
mhm.
someday I'm going to do some back of the envelope calculations and decide if I think that it is the most popular programming language in the world, because the other likely choice is COBOL. But I'm not sure whether it's surpassed COBOL as yet.
Yeah,
There's JavaScript, but frankly, I don't think nearly as much JavaScript gets written as that, unless you count auto-generated JavaScript, and I don't.
correct. Yeah,
Uh,
I think the issue that I have with the class is not necessarily Visual Basic, because like I said, it's not that the language itself is not useful. Like I've been using it for years in the Army. I use the
oh yeah,
developer tab
oh
in
no, it's
Excel. I love it.
yeah, oh, it's useful.
However, like I'm in my last week, and one of our assignments is to is to build a website using the .NET framework, web form, and building a website. But you know, I could be wrong. Like I said, I'm just a student, but I don't see a practicality to learn how to build a website, that because it can only be used in very restricted platforms.
Yeah, I think you're right about that. I think that's more of a dancing bear sort of thing. The phrase, "You're not impressed with how well the dancing bear dances. You're impressed that it dances at all."
At all. Yeah.
Um, yeah, exactly. Um, yeah, I suspect that's not going to be real practical. I also suspect that's not going to give you much visibility into the kind of lower levels of the stack. Because when you do something in a weird platform, usually what I'd say is, well, weird platforms often break enough rules to show you something interesting about what's going on. And it's
Mhm.
possible that does. Like I could imagine a Visual Basic implementation where you'd see all kinds of interesting things, because Visual Basic is not designed to do that. But in that specific case, I expect you'll see more of the cracks in Visual Basic and fewer of the cracks in the web architecture. Um, just at a guess.
Yeah. The same. So I usually take three classes. I take sub
Mm.
semesters, and I take three classes. So I take as many classes as I'm allowed to take using the GI Bill. They have like caps, and you
Mm.
can't take over 18 semester credit hours, so forth and so on. I usually take three, and I am taking three, and I'm taking a web programming class, and I'm also taking an application programming class, and they ended up being more similar in
Mm.
nature than I anticipated.
Sure.
So
Well, I'm an old guy, so I remember application programming, as distinct from web programming. But that's just less true than it used to be. I mean, it
that's
was
true.
true when I was in university, but it's just not as true as it was then.
Yeah.
Um,
And
yeah,
of course, my third class is Discrete Mathematics too,
nice.
and that one is definitely making me hurt a little bit.
Discrete math is one of those where my experience is it serves pretty decently for computer programmers. That's one that's genuinely practical in my experience.
Absolutely,
Not
I
every
love it.
mathematics class is. Like I
Yeah,
could name you some math classes that hurt a lot to take, and I still basically don't use them at all. But discrete math is
yeah.
pretty solid for what we do.
I loved it. Actually, that's uh, generally when you listen to podcasts and stuff, there's like this common question on like YouTube and a lot of other social media platforms. Do you need a computer science degree to program, right? And I have a different opinion on that. That I think that's the
Mm.
common answer. And my example is discrete mathematics, because if I hadn't gone to school, I have fallen in love, even though I'm horrible at discrete mathematics. And nonetheless, I am obsessed with it. I love it. It's the thing that I'm excited to do and learn. Even though I can barely pass, doesn't change the fact that I don't love it. So it's created a new love for something, and inspired me to read other things that I wouldn't have done if I was just,
Yeah,
like a code camp or online learning or something. So
yeah. I don't hear that question in that form very often. But I mean, that question, do you need a computer science degree to program? No, it's as silly a question as do you need a culinary school course to cook?
to cook,
I
yeah,
mean,
absolutely.
yeah, can you cook? Man, if you got an egg and a hot rock, you can cook.
That's right.
Like,
That's right.
now,
It,
that's not to say culinary school has no advantages. It has all kinds of advantages. It's not to say you don't, benefit from specialized equipment and specialized training, but do you need it to cook? Nah. The egg
yeah.
and the hot rock is more than some people need.
hmm Yeah, absolutely. It actually reminds
But
me I think it was who said that? I think it was Leslie Lampert that said, yeah, Leslie Lampert was like coding, something along the lines of coding is to programming as typing is to writing, something like that. I always think about that. It's like, can you program by reading a book? Yes. But are you just coding? Are you actually programming? Like, it's like this
yeah,
weird line, between the two. So
well, I'm pretty sure I know what he means, and if so, that's a very exact analogy. It's the sort of thing I'd expect from Leslie Lampert. Um, but yeah, if you think coding means roughly the same thing as medical coding, which is a different occupation where you sit and you write down codes, literal, multi-digit, multi-layer codes for different ailments and things for insurance companies, so that, medical billing can be done properly. Um, like there is a portion of our job that is a lot like that bit where the hard part of the for loop is making sure that you get the letters FOR in order, and if you make a typo it doesn't work at all.
hmm
Like if you decide that that is coding, not how I'd use the word, but I can totally see how somebody would, then it's exactly, that is to our job what typing is to writing, and it's a very exact analogy, and that the rest of our job is coming up with the outline and the summary and coming up with the actual content and getting it to relate. The rest of it is, the
correct.
parts of our
Yeah.
job that are most parallel to writing. It's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Um, but it depends, what you count as coding. Like
Yeah.
I'm
Actually.
pretty broad with the word. I take coding all the way up into what a lot of people would call architecture. So yeah,
Yeah.
depends how
Yeah.
you use it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say what we really need is a shared vocabulary, but no,
Yeah.
that's
Well, and we're
if you
talking about something that's grown so fast. Like as far as like verbiage, it's
yeah.
like I said, I have a daughter that is learning, taking it's actually called a computer science class in middle school, and really all they're doing is
Nice,
little animations and stuff like that, right? And to her, that's
nice.
coding, and
Oh, sure.
that's coding. Yeah,
Yeah,
you're coding.
absolutely.
hmm
Well, like Scratch is fantastic.
They use a lot
And
of Scratch.
yeah, so it's a good choice. I've done the same with my kids. And it's small talk under the hood. I mean, you can't really call it not programming without having an extremely specific definition of what programming is. You could call it
Right.
not coding if you believe coding is that thing Leslie Lampert was suggesting where you
Yeah.
just type the words, but it
Yeah.
is literally every part of programming except that. So it means you've got a really narrow definition of programming.
That's right. That's right. Yeah.
Uh, yeah, no, it's a gorgeous thing. Um, yeah, I've been reading Brett Victor lately, and Brett Victor is a fast way to make you feel like everybody's provincial. Have you read any Brett Victor?
I have not. I've been on a Knuth kick. Donald Knuth's take.
Knuth is good.
Yeah,
Knuth
I've
is
been
good.
reading. I just got done reading Surreal Numbers, old book, but man, really good.
Nice. Yeah, no, Knuth is a very deep thinker. Knuth is probably one of the most kind of focused thinkers we've got, and he does it by cutting off email for months at a time, among other things. Which
Yeah,
doesn't that
I've
sound
heard
like
that.
him? Like the way he writes just feels like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, no, Brett Victor is not primarily a computer programmer and has produced demos of of software development tools so good that everybody holds them up and uses them as the standard. Um, and then he doesn't really continue on that because it turns out he's got other fish to fry, and that's more the kind of stuff he actually does. He just kind of stopped
Right.
by and showed us how barbaric we were on the way to what he was really doing.
Yeah, just, let me swing by. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I have so much deep, honorable resentment for men like that. Who just show up and as a little tossed off aside, by the way, here's what the rest of you should be doing, and they're right.
Yeah.
Anyway, no, Brett Victor points out things like if you're designing behavior over time, there should be some time component to how you view that.
Oh, okay.
Which
Yeah.
Yeah, and he put together cute little, like, essentially video game design things. Like he's deeply disappointed with the processing language. Do you know the processing language, the visual one?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's deeply disappointed with that because he believes, for starters, well, he believes when you put a piece of code in place, it should do something perceptible. In other words, that it should do that thing humans expect everything in the world to do. It should do
Right.
that. Which should make you think for a second, why didn't we figure that out? When you add a piece of code, it should do something, and then you can adjust
Absolutely.
what it does. Like, and he shows little things where you do a little animation, and you can adjust various parameters, and the animation changes, and it's basically a little video game. And he uses an example with a guy hopping from platform to platform, and it's like, oh, if you're going to design physics parameters, you should have a thing going.
Right.
Well,
Absolutely.
yeah, okay, yeah, you should. Okay, you're right, and we're wrong. But there's so many things like that. Like, it's not that you can't have numerical parameters, but if you have numerical parameters, don't start with them blank and make people type a number. That's idiotic. And it
Yeah. Yeah.
is. It's idiotic. You
It is.
know, why don't
Absolutely.
you have a lot of that kind of state? Well, the functional programming people have told us that you don't want a lot of implicit state anyway, and so that sure they have their fun reason to hate the fact that in a graphics program, what you usually do is set the current color and then draw a thing in the current color, and like,
Yeah.
which is stupid for lots of other good reasons too, because in addition to being terrible for state management and terrible for complexity and terrible for debugging, it's also terrible for teaching.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
also
Absolutely.
terrible for communicating.
Yeah.
Really, everything about it is bad. And if
What
you
was
say,
his primary
well,
field of study?
he is a designer.
Okay.
He
Okay.
is not just a visual designer. He is a broader sort of designer than that, but he is an extraordinary visual designer. He has produced some award-winning little mobile apps, and he has had to hold his nose and do a certain amount of programming as part of that. And you can watch him. It's not even sneering. It's more pitying than that.
Yeah.
But like, really, like I have to slum it here long enough to build this excellent little visual app and do a minimum of actual coding. You guys live in this place?
Yeah.
Why'd you
This is
never
where you're
clean
at.
up?
Yeah, I think that's common. Not to veer off, but I think that's common in like the design aspect because I had a few friends that were going to school for like design and stuff like that, and even as simple
Yeah,
something simple as just like graphical like logo design, they're
yeah.
still learning how to code. They're still
Oh,
in
yeah.
a very technical atmosphere for that
Yeah.
spectrum.
Well, the thing he wants to be doing is he wants to create a humane representation of thought for humankind. And if that sounds large and ambitious, that's because it
Yeah.
is. If it sounds vague, turns out he doesn't mean it in a vague way, but we're missing almost all of the jargon. He's had to invent an awful lot of that.
Wow. Yeah, I definitely need to
It's,
check him out. I haven't heard of him yet.
yeah. If you go look at either what is it, the humane representation of thought, that's his big stage talk magnum opus, um, or you can look at him commenting on just how bad programming is with his up and down the ladder of abstraction, where he takes an extremely simple programming task and basically with a long series of JavaScript mockups in line says this is how you do this. Why have
Yeah.
you not done this?
Yeah. And that's the type of thinking that I think, and again, as a student, I interact with other students, and I think more people are eager to just code, like just to that they have an issue and they want to develop a solution, and that's it. And I don't think it's rather common to think more intellectual about that solution, right?
And you know what I find most depressing about what you just said? I mean, most of it I agree with, is that if you're in the software engineering groups, it's slightly worse than what you just said. It's not even that they have a problem and they're trying to find a solution. It's that they've been told a lot of ways to make solutions and they're out looking for a problem.
Picking a fight.
Well, yeah. If you're a software engineer, you have picked a large, intractable, ugly field of study, and you want to spend all of your time fighting against problems in it. Like, for what you've decided, for whatever reason, to stand there and do that. I mean, they don't tell you why to do it, but you picked that fight. Like, that was what you decided you were going to do. And maybe you're in it for the money, and maybe you're in it for something else, but you picked that for some reason. And I tend to say that software engineers are in love with problems. Be really careful with a software engineer, because they love problems way more than is okay. And that'll offend a young software engineer, which is exactly why I say it. That'll offend a young software engineer.
The question is, are they an engineer if there's nothing to engineer? I don't know.
Well, so it's even, yes, but also it's worse than that. I remember The Tick as a comic. You may not be old enough to remember The Tick as a comic. I don't know. But you know who I mean by The Tick as a
they made a
character?
they made a cartoon.
They made a cartoon out of him. Yeah. Before that he was an old comic by Ben Edlund. And there's a wonderful scene where he's encountering another superhero for the first time in a long time, and he's not sure how he feels about this. This is clearly not something he's in love with. But he's planning to go off and fight ninjas, and if he can find one, a supervillain. No, he's disappointed by the lack of supervillains as well. Mostly he's just kind of hanging out in the city and trying to figure out what to do. And he's telling the other guy to buzz off. This is his city. I am the protector of this city. And the other guy says, well, we could team up. Why, in a matter of weeks, we could extinguish crime in this city. I don't want to extinguish it. I just want to fight it. You have an interesting set of priorities.
Yeah.
The thing is, as a software engineer, if you were to successfully solve the problem so well it didn't need any more solving, now you're out of problems.
That's right.
We are exactly the Tick standing on the rooftop saying, I don't want to extinguish software solutions. I just want to fight them.
You just wrote your own meme right there. That's awesome.
But yeah. Well, and I don't know how much you hang out with business people, but if you ever want to be convinced that no, really, there's a such thing as people who aren't in love with problems, watch a business person. And the difference between the business and a software person, when you say, I've come up with a really dirty way that we could just tiptoe around this problem and never solve it. You watch which one's scandalized and which one starts to salivate.
Yeah. Well, I work for the last 15 years in the United States Army, and anybody that's been in the Army for a day realizes that's what you described is actually the full-time job of being in the United States Army, creating problems so you can fix them. So it's definitely what we do.
One of the best things I ever heard to remind me that the military is just a whole other world was they were talking about an Air Force base where they kept all of their backups on old floppies. Now, people who've kept big boxes of floppies in the closet, I certainly have, are familiar with a big problem being that if you just leave them for a couple of years and you pull them out, somewhere between a quarter and half of them are just not going to work, like they're dead.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And so you can make them work for military purposes by having a regular supply of new floppies and a regular backup schedule, and you keep multiple backups of each one, and you have people go through and do the copy, and you check if the copy is damaged. And it's a very effort-intensive thing, but you can make a basically reliable routine for it. And somebody was talking about, we can come up with a little networked thing that just keeps your backups here all the time, and you need network access. But in return, with no labor, you can just have that. And the guys on the Air Force Base were not interested, zero interest, because not only did they say you need network, which is a big minus, there's also a whole bunch of people who have been kept busy with this routine copying floppy disks and are out of trouble because they're all busy copying floppy disks. And you're saying, we could just let their hands be idle and let them make trouble for you. Mm-hmm. Zero interest. Zero interest.
We have all this technology and we just don't use it. I created, like I said, I use a lot of Visual Basic with Excel, and I do that because in my field in the Army, really my entire career has been a lot of data management, without it being called that, right? Yeah. And so when you're manipulating or storing or having to share data back and forth from one form to another, auto generating forms, so forth and so on, it's very easy just to use Visual Basic. I mean, it's very easy, quick, and you do these things, and I present it to like a command team, and they're blown away, right? They're like, this is revolutionary. I was like, Excel's been around a while. Just because you're using pen and paper for the last 20 years doesn't really make Excel amazing today in 2022. So it just kind of shows that we have the technology in the Army. It pays for certain technologies for us to use, but you have leaders that are 20, 30 years plus that are still just handwriting, and that's fine. But we're definitely behind the curve for sure.
Yeah, well, getting things in people's hands was the giant struggle that I kind of made it all the way through school and for a surprising number of years after that without ever understanding was a thing. And at some point you go, why is it that advertising guys get paid such a lot? Because their job is what's actually standing in the way of changing the world in most ways.
Absolutely.
Our job mostly isn't. I mean, sometimes, every so often, we're producing something you can't already do, but not mostly, right? Like, the vast majority of companies have competitors and good competitors, and especially if you count things like pen and paper as a competitor, they really have competitors.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, no, I mean, Excel, like, it is so underused. You hear these wonderful stories of people who have been using Excel for years and have been thrilled to have this thing that nails down all their numbers and never figure out you can use formulas to add up the columns of numbers. Because just having a place to put the numbers is so powerful to begin with.
That's right.
Oh, it turns out it's also magic.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of people look, like I said, especially in the Army, a lot of people look at Excel as like a, Harry Potter novel. It's like, like it's all magic and formulas and spells, and they get scared and they don't use it. And then when one person does, it changes everything, and I just, I think it's, with lack of a better term, kind of silly, because I think that it's not, Excel is not something that it's actually easy, and maybe I have a different perspective, but I think it's very common knowledge that's provided that you could use, some function easy.
You and I have an interesting perspective on these things because we live in a world that is already so destabilized by constant social change that you can't rely on almost anything from one day to the next anyway. I mean, that's just our world, right? Like software is not necessarily good at disrupting everything, but it's good at disrupting software. Like what we do tends to change a lot often. And so when we say to other people, here's this thing that can disrupt everything, and it's easy to use. You don't need that much training to go out and break everything.
That's right.
Why, in 2-3 weeks, you could be living in the same world that we live in, where everything is broken. Isn't this fantastic?
That's true.
Like, they're threatened by that in a way that's kind of hard to express if you grew up doing it. And I really did, and I get the impression you did too. And I don't just mean Western civilization, which has certainly broken a lot faster than it's used to. But like, if you live among computers, like our world just breaks a lot more and in some ways a lot worse. When cryptocurrency started eating the world and scamming vast numbers of people out of vast amounts of money, one of the reasons why a lot of people in our profession just kind of went, it's Tuesday.
It's Tuesday.
Well, it is that we were used to that kind of stuff by now. Like, it's not. This is like an investment, except terrible things can happen, and you can lose your entire life savings and possibly more, to anybody due to weird software bugs.
Right.
Like, it has taken time for even us to get used to the idea that that's okay, because it's not okay. And convincing us that it's okay is not really an achievement, but it's still taken a lot of work.
Yeah.
And so in the same way, the rest of the world are like the Amish, but less so, different in degree, but not necessarily in kind. Well, and I mean that as a compliment to the Amish as much as anything. One of the things about the Amish is it turns out there are early adopter Amish. I'm not kidding. There are specific members of the Amish who do things like they get the telephones or whatever, or new cell phones, or roller skates or whatever that is in their community new. And they have a small number of carefully cordoned off people who try the new thing. And then if it's decided it's okay after 2, 3, 4 decades, then maybe we begin the phased rollout. And if it's not, so like they're fine with a telephone in your neighborhood and have actually gone into the phased rollout of that. You can get a telephone shared in an Amish neighborhood for most groups of Amish at this point, because they've decided that doesn't disrupt the community. But they've decided that individual cell phones tends to cause an unacceptable level of disruption and disconnection. And so they tried that a little bit and they stopped, which is, to my mind, extremely well considered and level-headed. I mean, Absolutely. Yes, it's also slow, but boy, it's hard not to respect that, Like that shows integrity and principle. And so the rest of the world, when we say, here's this thing that will disrupt everything. No, it's easy to learn. Sit down, let me show you. To a large extent feel appropriately, reasonably, like we just said to the Amish, you don't understand, man. Snorting white sugar from a straw off the table is really good. Let me get you a straw. No.
You get a lot of work done. You'll work faster than never before.
So there's a natural reticence among people who have any sense of tradition, which is to say anybody who's not as socially broken as guys like you and me. When you say you could change everything. No, it turns out all those people adding up numbers here, we could have them out of a job Wednesday. Let's do this.
True. Yeah. And I feel there's a valid fear there for that, for sure.
Yeah. Well, and it's not that everything is bad, but like they feel like we take ludicrous chances for no reason. And man, if I had to, in a debate-style setting, explain to them why we don't, I'm not sure what my arguments would be.
Good point.
I mean, I could come up with something, but like, I'm not sure they're wrong. And so, one of the things to remember is that social change is the hard part. And that means that the way that we say the technique of doing this is easy is as senseless to most people who believe that social change should come slowly and people should have time to get used to it, as if you said, people talk about snorting arsenic like it's a problem. Like, what do? You get a little pile of arsenic, you snort it. Like, it's not hard. What are you guys making a big deal out of this? And the answer is, it's the consequences, not the action.
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
I'm not saying that all of tech is snorting arsenic. I mean, I do sell this stuff for a living. But like the idea that there's a social component and you should pay attention to the social component. The fact that we got away with ignoring so much of it for so long is, in some cases, simply and literally criminal. But even in other cases, like, we should fix that.
Absolutely.
Anyway, sorry. So I've gotten off the track. So you've talked about a couple of the classes you're taking. I'm used to the idea that a lot of people think software developers should be taking ethics classes, and nobody is particularly sure what that is, and relatively few places offer them. But sometimes you get something. You're in training now. Is there anything like that you have taken or are taking, or that's on the horizon?
Yeah. The school that I go to is very purposeful about that. So we do, anytime we have a class, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, it's not a set of classes. It's not, just a cyber security class that talks about it. It's kind of broadly in every class. They have discussion posts, and they usually ask, like, what is considered moral in this application? What's considered immoral? And it doesn't, kind of foster an opinion at the start for you. It kind of just leaves it open, which I really respect as a university. But I think that, it talks about it, but I don't think simply just asking the question is enough, if that makes sense. Is this moral? Well, sure. Okay. Yeah, it is. End of story. Right. I think it needs to go a little bit farther, and it kind of goes to what we were talking about a little bit before. And I think that is, with, the whole spectrum of computer science, whether it's, data science, software engineer, programming, whatever you want to call it. I think the original thought of there's a problem, whether I created it or not, and I need to make a solution. I think that that chain of thought, that process of thought, is kind of void of moral until the end. possibly, until it's
Hmm.
fixed. And until, like, I look at cybersecurity that way, in a way. You know, in the Army, we don't we focus on, it's kind of hard to see in the public, but we actually focus a lot on prevention. You know,
Sure.
how to not get to that position in the first place. And I think
Yeah.
that in a lot of software development, it's, let's make this great thing, let's solve this issue, and then after it's complete, we go, ooh, we've got issues here, cybersecurity issues, whatnot. We need to try and fix it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I could be wrong on that. It's just kind of how I see it.
Yeah. No,
From my
I think
position.
I think that's fair. I mean, a lot of the hard part of ethics in what we do is that so much of it is unpredictable. So much of the
True.
really worst stuff doesn't look necessarily bad when you're building it. And frankly, a lot of stuff that looks awful when you're building it never comes to much of anything. Most ideas are unsuccessful, and that includes evil ideas. An awful lot of, things that seem like a terrible idea turn out to be nothing at all because they just don't do anything. Um, no,
Yeah, and
well,
the
one,
internet's a good example of that, I guess. You know,
yeah,
just the creation of the internet in general the internet can be extremely evil, bad, malicious, or it can be great. You know,
yeah.
it can be all of the things. So
Yeah, well, there's certainly that. I actually meant that, for instance, if I was going to come up with the most evil technology based on computers of the 20th century, something that until I'd gotten a bit of education, I would never have considered. Oh, sorry, you still there?
yep,
Oh,
I'm
okay.
focused.
All right. Couldn't tell if the connection
Focused.
was breaking up. Cool. I may turn my video off in a little bit, just for bandwidth reasons. The most evil technology of the 20th century at this point, with some research, I'm going to go with computerized census.
Say the last part. Computer what?
Computerized census taking and
Oh,
storage.
okay. Wow, I never would have thought of that.
Uh,
Yeah.
well, turns out there's a great book about IBM and how it enabled the Holocaust. Uh, if you
Book.
if you look Yeah. Oopsie. No, if you look at it, it turns out that there have, for a very long time, been the kind of people who would like to do the kind of thing Hitler had wanted to do, and it never happened. Why didn't it happen? Well, it turned out we didn't have the tech. What tech was the big one missing? And the answer, it turns out, is the census. The answer is that if you want to track down 6 million Jews in your country and round them up, that's hard to track. That is
That is.
logistically difficult. I mean, you don't just have to want to do it, you have to be able to do it. And what you were missing, it turns out, is computerized tabulation and a census.
Yeah. That's you're right. I never would have I never would have imagined that at all. So yeah, it's a good point. You know, you could create, it is a solution to a problem in one aspect, but yeah, that's a good point. You're tracking down a type or particular group of people. 100%.
Yeah. And so the way that computers just kind of take existing bureaucracy and give it Superman powers, I mean, that's going to have unexpected upsides, but also unexpected downsides. And some in both directions are going to be really extreme. A lot of this is surprising. A lot of this we don't. The people designing the census would have every reason not to believe they were doing an evil thing. Like, I could imagine me sitting around trying to do that and not having any idea that it would be used for evil. And I'd have been wrong had I built that. So I'm glad I wasn't one of the ones doing it.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I wouldn't have known to prevent it if I wasn't one of the ones doing it either.
Yeah. I think there's a common concern in, the hot topic of AI. Like, I think the analogy is made like I can't even remember who made it, but I think the analogy is somewhere along the lines of you create AI to make the traffic better in a particular city. You tell it, hey, do anything between condition A, condition C to fix that issue. And then it might work really good at first. Traffic gets better, wrecks are reduced. And then it realizes that the only reason why there is traffic in the first place is because of those pesky humans, and just eliminates all the humans. So I think it's a drastic example, but I mean, it is an example.
Well, there's a cute phrase from AI circles, the paperclip optimizer. Have you heard this one?
Maybe not off the top of my head.
It's based on the idea that in order to destroy the universe with a sufficiently smart AI, it's not that you have to set it to a malicious task. It's that if you set it to any task, that task eventually becomes malicious if
Okay,
dealt
yeah.
with a certain amount of diligence and skill. There's a wonderful web game that is essentially a joke on the phrase paperclip optimizer for this, where they have you play. It's a very cute text interface. The game is called Universal Paperclips, but you play a paperclip optimizer. And some of the very, very best things that they do is that since you have a very business-like paperclip optimizing interface, like the entire interface is built around making paperclips, at some point you realize that you must have massacred the entire population of the Earth. You must have done it. Like, mathematically speaking, it has clearly been done. But you don't know when exactly that happened because that doesn't actually rate your interface. Like, you know about it purely in terms of its record of paperclip production.
Hmm. Interesting. Yeah, I'm sorry if you see me writing down notes. It's because.
Oh no, that's no trouble. I understand.
Yeah.
No, I should go back and I'll watch this again and take notes for similar reasons. You know, there'll be hyperlinks on the bottom in the on the site. Yeah. So again, tell me more about the kind of training you're in. Like, is there anything? I made this series partly based on the idea that if you had a whole bunch of people that had learned in different ways and talked about how that worked well or worked poorly, that people in your position would be able to say, oh, I've got this question, you know, while I'm here in school. You know, what's the answer to the question? Is there anything like that I'm missing? Is there anything you want to know that isn't well answered?
So I do have a lot of questions, and mostly because again, just a little background. You know, I am active duty military, so I have to take online classes. That's the only possible way I can do it. Moving every 3 years, every 4 years, so forth and so on. It's not functionable. So being an online student and being in the Army, there's not, most soldiers in the Army aren't going for a computer science degree. So there's not a lot of social aspect to be able to communicate and talk and figure out what the norm is. So as you start taking these classes, there's really no way to measure. There's no measuring stick on what is normal, what's not normal, what can you apply in the real world, what can you not apply. I think that as I go through, like just looking at the classes, I'm almost done. I should be done in the fall next year, or March, sorry.
Congratulations.
Thank you. So some of the classes, it makes you feel, you take the class, and the class isn't to, like, for instance, advanced C++. You know, you look at the title as a student and you're like, advanced C++. That means I'm going to be really good at C++ by the end of this, right? And the truth is, at least for me, that is not true whatsoever. And it basically teaches you, hey, this is a syntax. This is a class, this is inheritance, you know, and of course, and apparently in school, recursion is very important to understand because in every single class, it's recursion. And so you finish the class, and then by the end of it, you feel, it's almost like imposter syndrome a little bit. You know, you kind of feel like, you know, you're saying that you have studied this language, and if someone asked me a question, I'd have to get on Google because I'm not quite sure. You know, I'd have to kind of look into it. And so,
a lot of that'll stay true. A lot of that'll stay true, even if you're doing this for, 10 years professionally or whatever.
Yeah. And so, I retire in roughly 4 years, and hope to obviously use my studies in the field, in the civilian sector. And so a lot of my questions pertain to how I see a gap between, obviously, when you go to university and you get your degree in computer science, it's not preparing you to just day one ground running, ready to go. But obviously, if you start looking for different positions, it's must have 3 years experience. There's a code challenge or a code interview or so forth and so on. And to me, I guess my question is, where's the gap? Where's the educational gap between you've graduated to you can get hired? Because to me, there seems like a gap there.
No, that's a very fair observation. By the way, before we go, I am going to answer that, but before we do that, You mentioned that you're going to retire in 4 years. I know what you mean, but you can you give just a couple of sentence summary of how military retirement works for people who are listening and may be confused by that?
Oh yeah, they probably see I'm not quite that old. So yeah, in the United States military, the retirement is generally 20 years. I'm already at 15 years this past May. And I say 4 years because your last year is more of we could just call it a retirement year. It's when you start to out process medically because, the military's probably broken us in more than one way at a very young age. And they also do a lot of, sponsorship programs. They get you interviews with civilian jobs, which is good, it's a great program. But it doesn't really answer my question. There is still a gap there, even though the military can help. So after 20 years, you can retire, and I'll have health care pretty much for the rest of my life. And then, of course, I'll get my paycheck on the first of every month for the rest of my life. So it's a great benefit. I did that intentionally, not to answer the question in a very long form, but I did go to school for music first, right out of high school, and then realized I wanted more. I wanted a structure that could support me long lasting, and I knew I wanted to go to school. The military pays for my school. I actually get paid to go to school, so I haven't paid a dime. If not anything, I've actually earned. So
nice.
It's a great program.
Cool. That was great. Thank you very much. So to go back to your question about the gap, it can be very hard for people who are fresh out of school and have put their all into school and have not done much outside of school and are now saying, "Hey man, hire me."
Here I am.
Like that. Yeah, that can be rough. You are actually in a better spot for that. So a lot of the reason that people don't want to hire juniors, especially at smaller companies, basically the larger the company you go to, the more likely they're going to be okay with hiring juniors. As a rule, I mean, there are exceptions in both directions, but as a rule, that's the direction the spectrum runs. At a little company, if you want to work for a little startup or a consultancy or somewhere else where they're kind of scrappier, the reason that they say, "Hey, we want a couple of years of experience from you," is what they actually mean is, we've talked to a lot of fresh off the conveyor belt mass manufactured school graduates that can't do anything useful for us. Prove to me you're not one of those. And one way you can do that is a couple of years of successful work at a company. It's not the only way you can do that. That's one way you can do it. You, personally and individually, have been in the military. And so if you have to convince these guys that you have a sense of perspective and the ability to interact with your fellow human beings and kind of a track record doing work, you are in a position to say, "Hey, look, ask me about my military experience. I've got some ability dealing with structure." And that helps. That's not necessarily a full replacement for it, but it puts you up above somebody who hasn't done it, right? And so what you want to do is sort of look back at your track record and say, what's something good that's true about me that I can sell them on? So an early person who's trying to get their first job is being hired for potential. It's assumed that the actuality is not there yet, not because you're necessarily bad at the school stuff, because if you were fantastic at the school stuff, if you were as good straight from the school stuff as somebody could be just from the school stuff, that still would not be what they're actually looking for. They're hoping you're going to grow into what they're actually looking for. So then the question is, did you show some initiative? Do you have something else interesting? What can we do with you for a few years while you start to grow into what we want you to be? One answer is, I've got military experience. I've got the ability to manage groups. I've got the ability to, handle these things in useful ways. That can be one answer to that question. When people say, get yourself a GitHub profile, they are attempting to give another answer to that question. They are saying, okay, what have you done outside of what they assigned you? What have you done that shows that you have initiative and you do something interesting? Maybe that means you've got an area of interest that's valuable and you're good at it. Even that has value. For somebody who's trying to be hired into their first job, the question is, what have you done that shows potential? And that's why the answers tend to be so unsatisfying, because if I say to you, you were in the military, tell them you were in the military, the very high percentage of people who weren't in the military are going to say, that I wasn't in the military. That's not an answer. And it's true. Or, the people without an impressive GitHub portfolio say, I don't have time to make that. That's a stupid thing to sit and build. And it is. If you don't already have it, that's a stupid thing to tell you. It's the wrong advice. But the thing that underlies all that advice is, if you weren't in the military and you weren't out building your GitHub portfolio and you weren't studying machine learning in your spare time, what were you doing? Does it have
Yeah,
any
well,
value?
exactly.
Do you have any way
Yeah,
you could show it off? You get the same 24 hours a day as the rest of us. What were you doing?
right.
And there are people who can absolutely accurately and appropriately answer, man, I'm 17. I haven't done anything.
Yeah,
And they're not wrong. And they're in a worse spot than a guy like
yeah,
you.
yeah,
Because if the answer is I haven't done anything, well, that's where you tend to get answers like, have you considered working really cheap or free for a while? And it's a terrible answer. It's a
yeah,
terrible answer. You would never do that if you have a better answer to that question.
yeah,
But there is always the question, what if I've done nothing useful ever? And it's a real question. Like there are people
yeah,
who can answer that question. But before you get to that point, I would definitely recommend for the broad you in particular. Again, you got an
right.
answer. But for the broad you, I would say you must have done something with that time. Can you find some way to spin it as something useful? Because even taking something that's not terribly useful and finding a way to spin it, I mean, don't call it advertising experience, but it is,
Right.
and it's
Yeah, yeah,
valuable.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I think and you're right. I understand the value of my military experience. I've been an NCOIC, which is a non-commissioned officer in charge for several years now, so I can manage large groups. And so I do. That's one of the things I'm grateful for.
Hmm.
And but I didn't realize its weight, as you explained. I do realize that employers will go, oh, military, that you can work under stressful environments. You can get the job done with minimal resources. But I never really thought of it applying necessarily to a computer science field or programming
Sure.
field, and in that way. So that's a great explanation. I think that as going through these classes too, so I did not sign up for computer science because I had a particular goal. I didn't have like a particular predilection to programming or anything like that. It was just the literally the science of computers. I wanted to study computers. I wanted to figure it out, and I've been that way. I'm old enough that I am lucky in that sense that I remember when there were no computers in the home. I'm 38 years old. That wasn't a thing. We didn't
Yep.
have, we didn't have Palm Pilots didn't even exist anymore. We didn't have any of those things, and
Yep.
internet that didn't exist. So I'm lucky enough that growing up, I think I was born at a very good time where I got to live in a very curious environment around computers and technology, and literally grow up with it in a way.
Yep.
And so for me, computer science is more of literally the science, the study of computers. And so as I go through this, my focus is in cybersecurity. I picked that just because I've worked in the Department of Defense for so long. I have a security clearance. Why not? It makes sense.
That's valuable.
Yeah. So, but I have no, particular goal. So really my question is I've, for you, an example, you didn't just one day start working with Ruby and Rails. Like, it's not like
No.
you started that way. For me, as I go through computer science, and I take different classes, and I think that's the importance of computer science. Like earlier, the question is, well, don't get a degree, just go to a code camp or, online,
Yep.
whatever,
Yep.
Udemy, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And I
All
think
those.
I think the value of going to actually university for computer science is it can teach you what you don't know. And when you learn what you don't know, you actually might learn something about yourself, what you like. And for me, I've fallen in love with mathematics, which is a funny thing. If anybody that actually knows who I am and knows my background realizes that doesn't make any sense for me to say that. But I love mathematics in a way that I never would have if I did not study computer science. And so, I'm as a student nervous and anxious because I don't know where I'm going. I love
Sure.
object-oriented programming. I love the C language, but I also love mathematics and the study of algorithms. And it's like, where do you go next? Like I said,
Everywhere.
you didn't just start with Rails and Ruby, and I know you're kind of known on the YouTube market as that, but you obviously have a lot more experience and had a lot more other roles and jobs.
Yeah. Well, I mean, while you've been in the military, I've been doing this stuff. So yeah.
Yeah.
Um, so one way to plan your career is to assume that you're going to stay in a corporate job. It's not the only way to do it, but somebody out there at least is considering that. So I'll say this. And it's really easy as you talk about the mathematics, as you talk about the science of it, as you talk about all of these things, to think that the way you advance is to get better at all of those things. And if that's not the case, for better or worse. It's a reasonable thing to think. It's not the case. And so one thing you could do is you could look at, I always point people at John Allspaugh's definition of it, the kitchensoup.com, what is a senior engineer? And you'll know you found the right thing when you find kitchensoup.com, what is a senior engineer. But the short version is that a lot of the things you've done with leading groups is very, very germane to what more senior engineers do. That is a significant amount of the kind of thing we do. And overall, it's about communication in one way or another. Absolutely. To some extent, it's about organizing the group. Even when it's not about organizing the group, it's usually about talking to the group. Even when it's not talking to the group and you're sitting and writing code, the more senior you get, the more you have to be thinking of that code in terms of what it teaches the reader. You are communicating with humans, and incidentally, you have to do it in a form that executes the correct way on the computer. But it's a constrained writing exercise. It's like if you had to use only words between 5 and 8 letters long or something like that. Like, it's not the point. It's an extra thing that you have to do, and you're going to get good enough that you can do it without thinking about it. And now the hard part, the thing that is so hard that humans can go cradle to grave and never get fully good at it, is communicating with other humans.
That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yeah. And I think that for me as a student, and I if I feel that way, I'm sure a lot of students feel the same way. As computer science continues to grow, I'm sure there's classes that I'm taking that weren't even a class at all 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago.
Sure.
And I think as things kind of grow, you've got the Internet of Things, so forth and so on, automation in computation and vehicles, so forth and so on. I think that it's a train we're kind of chasing. And so you go through school and you get out of school, maybe you get a job, and you're just constantly running. And that's what it feels like. You're just chasing all the time. And I feel like I could study, because I'm a very curious person. I study way more than I need to. I read way more than I need to. And I'm almost starved for information. And I feel like I'll be that way until the day I die. Because it's just chasing.
You'll never run out of things to learn. Something that you said kind of resonated with me, and I'll say this, and you can decide if it resonates with you. But I think I'm right about this. So you talked about, this wasn't your phrase, but you wanted an overview. You wanted to know what you didn't know. You wanted to get the lay of the land. You wanted sort of the broad map so that you could go in and you could find all the smaller maps, which is a wonderful thing to want. What's interesting is if you talk to people who have gone through the university degree and come out of it, a lot of what they're criticized for is not having the lay of the land and not understanding the broad perspective. And then you talk to people who've been in industry a few years, and it's the same complaint. I don't have the lay of the land. I don't have the broad perspective. You go and you join industry groups and you find whisper networks of people to talk to in your spare time, and it's all because you don't have the lay of the land. You want more of a perspective on it, and they keep changing the job under you so that there's new things you have to find out. And part of the problem is now you don't have the lay of the land. You don't have the perspective. And so to a large extent, that's just going to continue. The academics will point at the corporate types and say they don't really understand, they don't have the perspective, and vice versa with the corporate types pointing at the academics. I'm sure you've heard both directions on that.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm.
And different parts of the industry are the same way. The financial guys will point at a lot of the rest of us, and they're not wrong. We're missing some important stuff, and we'll point at them and say, but it's the same thing. And so to a large extent, understand you're going to have imperfect information about those things. You can, again, go cradle to grave. And there are wonderful folks. I've been reading Gergely Rose recently. Man, I can never remember what his actual brand name is, but mainly it's just him talking. And he talks a lot about what's going on in the industry and what different companies are doing. And I'll read it for a few weeks and I'll get bored of it because I don't actually have time to keep track of what all the big companies are doing. There aren't enough hours in the day.
No.
But wow, it's amazing watching a guy who actually goes and interviews hundreds of engineers from all of these places and can tell you, well, when I asked all of them, this is what they said. How's this going over? How do people feel about Scrum? Well, how do they feel about what project management thing they're using? Well, I asked thousands of people at tens or
Yeah.
hundreds of companies, and this is what they all said.
Yeah.
No, it's just amazing, and it feels so complete. You know how
Yeah.
you would get it to feel really incomplete? You would go do the same thing yourself and find all those holes he's not telling us about.
Hmm.
Because as satisfying as it is for you and me to read it, I'll bet it's really unsatisfying to look at the data from his perspective because he
That's right.
knows where the little holes are.
Hmm.
Not
Right.
because he did a bad job. He did a fantastic job. But that's what doing a fantastic job looks like in the real world.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, I think the overview for me is, and it could be a, a personality trait. I'm not sure, but I think I constantly have this. I guess fear is the right term. I guess I have this fear of something hitting me broadside. Like you're
Yep.
studying something, maybe it's like C++ or something, and then you feel really good about it, and then you find out there's this whole new world of something else. You get in
Yep.
this and like, hey, what's CMake? Wait a minute, CMake? What are you talking about? Like
Yep.
it's just, I feel like there's so many things that can be thrown at you when you're trying to focus and study. And so I guess maybe that's a military personality trait. I'm not sure, but I kind of always want to know what's going on around me. Where's the exit? Where's the entrance? How do I know?
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Yeah.
And you'll always get some of that, and there'll always be some of it blindsiding you. I don't know how much you've played in the JavaScript end of the pool, but
A
JavaScript
little
is
bit.
constant reminder to the rest of us that they can invent frameworks faster than we can find out anything useful about them.
Yeah. I think it's funny because the first language, so I taught before, obviously I started programming long as a teenager, long before. But however, one of the first languages that I kind of dove into to teach myself as a young adult was HTML, CSS, and JavaScript.
Sure,
And that was
absolutely.
when I learned about the infamous for loop. Um,
Hmm.
and yeah, that was one of the first things that scared the crap out of me for sure. Yeah,
That, yep, makes sense.
yeah. That's I think for me, as a learner, I had mentioned to you before, I'm dyslexic, so I think that one of the things that I have been able to kind of remedy that learning experience is to pretty much overstudy.
Sure.
The way that I look at things, my brain likes to play tricks on me. I might read something and in my head I think it's saying one thing, but it's actually not. And so I think also as a computer science student, that's another thing. Like with discrete mathematics,
Yep.
we're studying the Turing machine, automata, and I think that it's very easy for me to have to read something, understand it, think I understand it, and then come back the next day and be like, what is, read it again and
Yep.
it's saying something completely different. So I think that, for me, it's as a student, I guess some of that, fear comes from that as well. Learning how to teach something to yourself because you're an online student, right? You're pretty much
Yeah.
teaching yourself for the most part. And I've had some really bad professors, really just horrendous. I should have just taught the class. I mean, and then you've had some teachers that really, held you to a standard, you
Yep.
know, would literally call my phone and go, you're not going to do this. This is, you're better than this. And so but those teachers they're not common
No.
at all.
No, my wife was a teacher for a long time, and I still marvel at some of the things she talks about doing. And she taught in high school, you'd say, in the United States. Secondary school is what you'd say over here.
Yeah.
But
She's from the
yeah,
United States.
she's from the United States. Yes, she
Okay.
was
Yeah.
teaching in San Jose, in
Oh,
California.
okay. Okay, cool. Yeah. And you're originally from Texas, right? I think
I grew up in Texas, went to college in Pittsburgh, then
that's
lived
right.
in California for 20-ish years.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've been various places.
Yeah.
Yeah. So a couple of questions I often ask in these interviews that I think are still appropriate here. Um, Just quickly, and I understand you don't know yet, but do you feel like you are basically being prepared reasonably to go out and do your job once you find the job?
So obviously, I don't know for sure, obviously.
Mm,
However, I feel that it does, in the sense
good.
that, and there could be, 20 of my classmates that are graduating that could feel the exact opposite, because I think really university is how much you invest in it. I really feel that way for me. If I invest a lot into it,
Yeah.
and do a lot of self-study, I'm going to get a lot in return. But I think
Yep.
it does, because, it, of course, you're not going to graduate with being able to just from scratch start developing in any particular language without any, just perfect, right?
Yeah.
But I think that it's, given you a set of tools. You
Yep.
have a set of tools. You know what the tools are. You may not know exactly how to use them perfectly, but you know there's a tool that exists to solve that issue.
Yep.
And then it's up to us as an individual, when we get selected for, hired to work somewhere, to be like, okay, here's a problem presented by my employer. I don't know how to fix it, but I know there's tools for it, and start
Yep.
figuring out how to use those tools to solve the solution. So in that case, in that general case, I feel very confident, that I could probably create a solution to fix a problem. It might take me very long to do, and it might be a
Mm,
very slow application. But
yep.
I know that I could at least come up with a solution, if that makes sense.
Yeah. It does. It does. Well, the other thing I'm seeing, and since I'm looking at you on video at the moment, but you mentioned music, and I can see the amplifier and a couple of guitars behind you,
Hmm.
which to me gives at least one extra good sign that is not necessarily obvious to everybody who's listening to this. Um, because you understand that there are projects where even if you do it diligently and excellently and you've got a talent in that direction and you're basically fine at it, there's nothing wrong with how good you are at it, still take a long time. It turns
Absolutely.
out that you could study astoundingly well at piano for 5 years and you would still be a pianist with 5 years experience, and that is different from being a virtuoso with 20. It's
Hmm.
even if you are amazingly talented, it's just different.
Yep.
um,
Absolutely.
and 20 is not the highest that scale goes. And I think we're starting to see some of that in computer programming as well. We've had computer programming long enough, and there have been a few of us that have been doing it long enough, and it's enough that you can kind of see the broad strokes of some of it. Um, that we've come to understand that this isn't something where you work really hard for 3 years and then you're just perfect at it.
Yeah.
Like it's
Yeah.
it's not that kind of thing. It can't be.
No.
It's um, but I think that wasn't as obvious for a while. I think when I was in university, there were very few people that really got that. I won't say they didn't exist. I got a great advice from a small number of specific people in university, usually not the professors. But there were a few people that understood it. Um, but I think we're getting that it's something where to be a really excellent programmer, it may take 20 years, just like being a piano player. And that
Hmm.
doesn't mean you can't do anything useful after a year or three, but it means, it's a long road.
Yeah. Yeah.
Cool.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So, um, pretend this gets really popular, goes viral. Everybody hears this. They love what you have to say. They want to hear more about it. If this were on Twitter, you'd be posting your SoundCloud. What's your SoundCloud? Where do you want people to go after this?
Well, I have two. I have to double check and make sure. My
Okay,
Instagram is open. It's not a closed
cool.
Instagram account. And that should be, um, yeah, Coastal Coder is my, Instagram. And of course,
Cool.
I do have a Substack, under the same, Salty Science. So,
Salty Science.
yeah, that's a Substack. And I try to post on there as much as I can. And what I like to do is just post what I learn, how I see it. Doesn't necessarily mean it's right. It's just how I perceive it. So yeah, the two places.
Cool. Sounds good. So you've got military experience. You're still in university. Those are two things that are unusual about you. There are, I'm sure, far more things that are unusual about you that I don't know because I've only just met you, and
Yeah,
you've met you a long time ago now.
that's right.
What'd you say, 38 years ago?
38. Yeah.
Yeah, you've been at this a while. Um, there's some really good question that I should be asking you, and I don't know what it. I don't know you well enough to do it. What should I be asking you about? What did I miss?
I think we covered it all.
Okay.
It's for me. It's I think and I think we talked about it a little bit, but I think one of the most unique things that that kind of plagues me is just the learning disability part, which we talked a little bit before, and maybe it's not that uncommon. But
It's really
I think,
not.
yeah, I think that aspect of it, which we did talk about, but I think that for me as a growing up, I was told that you couldn't do math. You just basically were not going to do good in school, right? In fact, my parents sent me to a private school because public school was not gonna help. So they rounded up enough to put me in private school. And even in a private school setting where we only had 23 kids in the class, the math teacher just sat my parents down and said, "Nope, this is not gonna work. He can't do it. He just can't do it."
Yep.
And so I ended up going into music because of that, which is fine. I loved music, and what I didn't realize is I was actually doing mathematics. So I didn't, no one knew, hey, you can't do math, you can't do science, just go do music. And there's actually a lot of similarities between the two. And so I think that's just something that, I guess if I could say is that anybody can do, you can, the skills that you need are not restricted by dyslexia at all. You have to just do them differently. And in fact, I think it's made me a better learner because I can think in different ways that generally are not thought of.
Yeah, there are some wonderful books about how dyslexia is a very creative sort of thing, and more to the point for what you have to say there, an awful lot of what I hear about dyslexia suggests it's not that you can't understand the thing, but you're having trouble reading it. And man, there's a lot of ways to route around reading. Like if what you want to do is not read, there's lots of good ways to fix that. And the other thing you mentioned with the sort of distrust of what you read, which makes total sense, both for you and for humans in general, and I agree, it sounds like it's making you a better learner, is reading multiple accounts, circling back to it, working out how to do it on your own. I've always found a healthy distrust of the material I'm absorbing has always been my greatest asset as well. I mean, I'm not dyslexic, I'm pretty sure. But no, like you should definitely not trust people the first time round. Make them prove it, because an awful lot of them are bullshitting you.
That's right. And I think that's why I've fallen in love with mathematics, maybe just thinking about it now as we're talking, because mathematics is it's either proved or it's not proved. It's either true or false. It's either 1 or 0. I really find comfort in that. And I wish I had found that comfort at an earlier age, because now I'm 38 trying to figure out discrete mathematics. So, I wish I could have started earlier. But, again, this is the 90s when I was going through this as a teenager. And I think that there wasn't a lot of resources as there are now. So maybe it's not an issue for teenagers coming up today that are looking into getting into the science field. So I'm not sure.
I've been surprised getting out of Silicon Valley how little the presence of, say, Google changes the landscape socially. Again, it's one of those things where you and I can say, but it's not hard to type a question into Google. And it's not. It's not. But an awful lot of the world has not decided to let that reshape their entire society the way that we do in Silicon Valley. We'll see if they're right or we're right in the long term.
Yeah.
So you mentioned, loving that things are either proved or not. How do you feel about stuff like the Collatz conjecture, where we see something and we've never been able to disprove it, but we also can't prove it?
Yeah. So I always tell my kids, because I'm very science oriented, and so if they do something wrong, I usually go, well, you did this wrong. Why did you do it? Let's get a hypothesis and let's prove. Let's go through the steps, scientific. In a scientific way. So I think that I've always said that science can never prove something, but it can definitely disprove something, and that's not the same thing. It's not the same thing. So
so you're fine with the Collatz conjecture.
Yeah,
you just
for me that's the
same
thing as 1 0.
math.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. All right. That makes a lot of sense. Cool. All right. We've been talking for about an hour and 10 minutes now. Is
Oh
there
wow.
anything that you would like to cover before I hit stop on the recording? Is there anything we should still talk about that we haven't?
No, not really. No, I think this has been a great conversation for me, and like I said before, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, me too. No, you've been great to talk to. I like it a lot. It's one of the best things about doing these that I get to talk to a lot of interesting people. All right, cool. Well, this has been Computer Science, Just the Useful Bits, and I have been Noah Gibbs, same way I always am. And this one's been Larry Orton. I don't usually see him.
Thank you.